your pictures look like this. Are you having trouble with ugly colors or wonky color casts on your film scans? In this video, I'm going to be talking about how to diagnose color problems, how to fix them, and essentially why color balance is important for your images. First things first, color or correct color is an incredibly subjective topic. No two people are going to have the exact same opinion on it, but most people consider a correctly color balanced image to be a nice visual representation of your scene. If you look at the world, your brain is doing a huge amount of processing to kind of balance the colors as you see them. Your camera can't always do that, but with a little bit of help, be it in the darkroom, on your computer, or even in camera, you can really make your film scans sing. They'll look so much better. And to be honest, if you are one of those film purists that just accepts whatever your scanner spits out, then you shouldn't be. Don't see that as a strength, because if you want to create a great image, it's really important to have a nice starting point. I'm going to split this video into 3 different topics. We're going to have fixing it in camera, or kind of during the shoot. We're going to have fixing it during the scanning process. And at the end, I will show you how to do it in Photoshop as well. These 3 different aspects to color balancing, each lose a bit of strength as they go. If you do it in camera, you're going to have the best negative, which means that when you do it in the scanner, you're going to get the best results, which means that you won't have to do as much, or you'll have to do very minor edits in Photoshop. So I'll put timecodes down below. You can skip to the different parts as and when you need them. First things first, let's talk about doing it in the camera itself. 99% of film, the great majority of film, is daylight balanced. That's when most people shoot it. A lot of people don't even use artificial light. So if you're not using a flash and you're shooting it out and about, then you're going to be shooting a daylight film. Portrait, Ektar, Fuji, all of the popular films are daylight balanced. And you'll know if they're not because they'll have a T afterwards. And the famous one, or the best example of that, is CineStill. If you're using a daylight film, it means that it's going to look relatively accurate during the daylight hours, let's say between sunrise and an hour before sunset. And then you're going to have golden hour, which is going to give that gold tint to your film. After sunset or just before dawn, you're going to have that blue tint to it. That's what we're all used to. That's what our eyes see, and that's what you're probably shooting already. Let's talk a bit about CineStill, or tungsten balanced film. That's designed to be shot under tungsten lighting, which is significantly more orange or warmer than daylight. If you shoot a film like CineStill during daylight, what you're going to do is you're going to expose film that expects orange light to quite blue light. And as a result, you're going to get very blue images. Now, you can fix this. And if you look at this quote on CineStill's website, it actually leads straight into the first aspect of fixing your color. This is the AT1A filter, or kind of warming filter that CineStill mentioned. And what this does is allows you to change the light that you're transmitting onto your film to have a slightly orange tint. If I hold this up to the lens, you'll see that what it does is it just slightly warms the world as it's absorbed into the lens. It warms it so that your blue light appears white to your tungsten film. Likewise, we got this one here. This is a skylight filter, and you can use this during the day to make the atmospheric blue effect that you get. The obvious example is using telephoto lenses on mountains that are far away. This will take a bit of that out, and it will give you a slightly more neutral or less blue daylight. Lastly, we have the opposite, and these are filters that actually cool down your light. This is let's have a look. This is a B2 filter. So it's very slightly blue, and an example of using this would be to take sunset light and make it appear more neutral. Now obviously we all like golden hour, and that is seen by many people as the best time to shoot precisely because of that orange light. But if you think you could be using it to take tungsten lights down to more neutral, or because you're shooting something that requires a great deal of color accuracy and your light source is too warm. Let's have a look at a color temperature chart. If you imagine tungsten as this end of the scale, so in the warmer, right down here we have fire or lit matches, that really kind of warm gold light. And at the top end, we have super, super bright, kind of, what are the car headlights that blind people at night? Xenon or whatever. We have the whole scale that goes through that, and what we are trying to do is get the correct light that the film wants to see to hit the film. Obviously, if you can't put a filter on your lens, you can also just change the light that is hitting it. I'm using this video light, which is daylight balanced, but what you can do is you can add gels or CTO gel. I mean, CTO is color temperature orange. Essentially, they're sheets of plastic that you put in front of your light source, and what it does is it changes the light that comes out of it to have a different color. This one here is to change a tungsten light into a daylight balanced light. So if you imagine you have an incredibly orange light source going through this blue plastic, and it will come out looking white. Enough about gels. I mean, unless you're shooting in the studio using flashes or controlled artificial lighting, you're probably not going to worry about that too much. So if you are using a tungsten film in daylight, get one of these. And if you're worried about your film looking too warm, get one of these. There are a few drawbacks to using filters. Obviously, if you are using a filter, you're going to lose a little bit of your transmission value. So if you're shooting slide film and you've already meter again after putting the filter on. I think this has an exposure coefficient of about 1/3 of a stop, which is negligible for color negative, but might make quite a difference if you're shooting slides. The warm ones are about the same. They're kind of just, these are two sides of the middle, and you can use them, carry a few, and I'd actually recommend just getting the warming filter because I've never used this one. So adjusting your lights or adjusting your filters are the two ways that you can balance the color that comes into the lens. But let's say you've already shot the film, you've developed the negatives, they've dried, you've cut them, and you're putting them in your scanner. Now, a lot of people outsource this to labs, and if you are doing that, then maybe you should look at doing it at home. You can save a lot of money. But if you are scanning at home, it is very important to get the best scan you can in the scanning software. What I'm going to do is jump onto the computer. I'm going to show you Epson Scan, I'm going to show you Silverfast, and then we're going to finish with a little bit of Photoshop to really wrap up the final edits to the image. So I've got my picture opened up in Silverfast. You can see that I've currently got my frame up here because Silverfast does have an auto kind of color balancing feature. You can see I've also set my Negafix to Fuji Pro 400. Now, what I'm going to do is put this frame on the image, and you'll see that it will actually do its own adjustment based on the frame I set. So if I set that, let's do it fairly accurately, you can see that the image has actually been balanced already. We can check that by opening the pipette tool and setting a neutral point on this white cloud here. You can see that has made a slight change. I can get a full readout actually if I shift click it, and you can see there that it's 248, 249, 50, so very close together. The most important tool in Silverfast for controlling your color casts is this global color correction. Now you can use this to adjust the highlights, shadows and midtones separately, but they're incredibly useful to use globally on the entire image to remove any casts. For the purpose of this video, it's actually quite annoying how accurate the colors already look. What I can do is give it a fake blue cast, and you can see that at each point, all you want to do to remove the cast is to drag your point away from the color that's overrepresented towards the opposite side of the wheel. So to remove the blue cast, I drag towards yellow, but likewise, if I had a green cast, I would drag it towards magenta. If I put this back in the middle, another way to express it, if I click on expert mode, is as these three sliders. Now we'll see these again in Photoshop, but essentially your balanced image occurs when all of these colors are kind of harmoniously represented. If I give it a fake cyan cast, you can see that by drawing the cyan towards the middle, I'm moving the point towards the white, but essentially I'm saying remove cyan and add to the image this red channel here to balance it as I'd like to see it. Let's turn this off. That image looks good, and it is very important to get your colors looking good on the scan, especially if you're not scanning in 48-bit. Now, your colors can only be pushed so far, be it a 48-bit file or a 24-bit file. You're going to get the best overall colors if the file that you encode into the TIFF or JPEG within your scanner has the accurate colors kind of already present. Your colors can only be pushed so far, so if you load a very wonky file into Photoshop, you might have trouble fixing it. For example, if I was to scan this file, I might have a harder time making the blues, or the greens rather, look correct in Photoshop than I would if I was to scan it correctly. That's it for the scanning. It is pretty simple, and no matter what scanner you use, there is going to be some of this color adjustment and balancing. The labs will do it. I mean, any mini lab will have the same process where the software is looking at the scene and trying to balance it for the colors it thinks are best. If you think about it, if you send your negative to 3 different labs, you are going to get 3 different images and 3 slightly different looking colors depending on the kit they use. But this looks pretty good. If I was to scan this now, I'd be pretty happy with those colors. Just quickly, because I know a lot of people are also using Epson scan. Flatbeds are very popular. This is what comes with them. If you want to do the auto mode in Epson scan, I'm not sure how you do it the accurate way, but what I do is I double click color restoration, and that will give you the software's best kind of interpretation of the scene. That looks pretty good. If we look at the cloud, you can see that it is looking pretty white up here. You can see the histogram, or rather the RGB readout in the bottom right makes it look accurately white. You can also go into this image adjustment panel and you have access to the cyan, red, magenta, green and yellow, blue sliders. So you can add a tint or remove a tint, remove your casts using this. Of course, if I just reset that, you could also do this using the curves tool. So if I go in here, I can do my red, green and blue channels, and I can use those to add and remove casts in a very similar way. This is the image I used in the intro. You can see that it has this incredibly pronounced blue cast. It doesn't look good. It's an awful shot to print, to share. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how within Photoshop you can color balance your image, and I hope that I'll show you how to get a usable image out of this. First things first, I've noticed that this is 0.3 of a gig, which is a little bit extreme. So I'm just going to quickly downsample this. Okay. So there we go. Now, first things first, I'm going to take my levels tools and I'm just going to set a black point and a white point, and that looks a bit better. My properties back in here. Okay, so there are 2 ways you can do this in Photoshop. You can use the color balance tool, which is very similar to what we saw in Silverfast, where you get the kind of the RGB channel additional thing. Let's set that to 0 because I'm actually going to start using the curves tool. Now, if you did shoot this and you know that there's a neutral point in the image, a very, very quick and easy way of doing this is to click the gray color picker and just click on something neutral. I'm going to try it on some of this cloud up here, but I'm a bit skeptical. Yeah, see, this image is so blue that you can see it tries to add all of the red. Actually, I'm going to undo because I seem to have fixed it. So can you see this is clipping the red channel? That's how much red it's trying to add, and it's removing a lot of blue. If I step forwards, you can see that down here on the cliff, I actually found a relatively neutral point. This is pretty good. All I need to do now is a little bit of curves adjustment. Let's raise that a bit, and that's the finished image. Now this is the shortcut. If you don't want to do it like this, I'm going to show you the long way of doing it. But I think that's fairly useful as an image. Let's quit this, let's delete my curves tool, and I'm going to do this again. If you don't want to use that color picker tool, although I do recommend using it, it is really useful, but this isn't the best image for it. So I'm going to show you how to do it in images that don't have a neutral point or have weird things going on, maybe multiple different light casts or stuff like that. So let's click up here, curves. And again, I am going to put the contrast back in because that's just necessary for the image. So here's my start point, and I'm going to make a new curves layer because this one's just for contrast, this one's for color. Now we know that there's a massive amount of blue, so a good way to start would be to go into the blue channel, and that's just RGB, and take out some of the blue here. And likewise, we're underrepresenting the red, so let's go into here and add, sorry, that's RGB, let's go into here and add some red to the image. Now you can see that I've whitened this cloud significantly, but it still looks a little bit off. let's have a zoom in on the boat and see if it's more obvious when it's slightly bigger. Okay, now up here I've got my RGB histograms. There is a lot more blue in the image, and that's because of the sea. So let's look for something that's very white, such as this boat. Okay, that still looks a little bit blue to me. So what I'm going to do is go back into here. I've got my blues, and I'm going to take a little bit of blues out of the highlights. You see that as I take it very slightly down, that boat goes from kind of fluorescent to slightly more neutral looking. That's quite a small adjustment, but that looks better to me. That looks better, and it seems like the last thing I do is use the final tool and just take a little bit of this green out here. And as I do that, you can see it really pops into kind of a vivid sort of lifelike representation of the scene. If you look at this as it is now, that's the finished image, and if I turn all three of these off, that's what I started with. You don't have to use all the tools. You can use the shortcut method, you can use just the curves, just the color balance. All you're doing is using different ways of affecting the reds, greens and blues to balance your image and to draw it towards neutral. They call it balancing because it's a little bit on the left, a little bit on the right, bit of green, bit of magenta. But if you pull all the strings and you use all the tools, you're going to get a clean, color balanced and sort of printable, shareable image.
Thanks for sticking with it this far. I know that color balancing isn't the most exciting aspect, but it is so important, and it's a slight personal crusade of mine. I see these poorly color balanced images and I see people throw their hands up and say, I like it that way, this is the image I wanted to create. Don't do that. I mean, I've gone through in excruciating detail how you can do it with filters, with your scanner, with your Photoshop software. So if you know someone who is creating these images, if you see one that is out there in the wild, send them this vid. Not even in a please share my YouTube content, and more like a kind of please stop these people. And hopefully you are now more comfortable with either doing it the filter way, the software way. Either way, I hope that you've enjoyed this, maybe pick something up, and thanks for watching. I'll make sure that my next video isn't quite as ranty.